Buon pomeriggio.
Good afternoon and welcome to you all. Today's topic focuses on a very important issue. And this is the last chronological issue of a series of very important meetings that were held during this year's edition. First and foremost, the meeting between Professor Olivier Roy and the General Secretary of the World Muslim League, Al-Bouissa. During their conclusions, they stated the need for religious freedom to believe. Today, together with our speakers, we will focus on the contents of a document that was published at the end of April this year. This is the document published by the International Theological Commission. Therefore, this is a contribution for an in-depth analysis on such a central issue for coexistence between people and peoples, i.e. religious freedom. More than 50 years after the document published by the Second Vatican Council, Dignitatis Humanae. The title of this document which took 5 years to be written from 2014 to 2018 under the Theological Commission supervision, speaks for itself. Religious freedom for the good of all. During the meeting, we will have with us Mr. Javier Prades, whom you very well know. It is not the first time for him at the meeting. He is a professor of fundamental and dogmatic theology and rector at the University of San Damaso of Madrid, and is also a member of the International Theological Commission, as well as a chairman of the subcommittee which drew up the document approved by the plenary session of the Commission and approved for publication by the Pope. After him, we will be focusing on a church which exists in a minority where conversion, as we're used to think about conversion, is not possible, as in the Church of Algeria. And we have with us the speaker, Mr. Georgeon, Father Thomas Georgeon. He was the postulator for beatification that for the first time took place in an Islamic territory on the 8th of December 2018. Father Georgeon is a Trappist father. After studying in Sorbonne in Paris, he worked for 5 years in a photo agency. In 1994, he joined an abbey, Notre Dame de la Trappe, and then he became prior. In 2009, he was elected as abbey in the community of the Trappe Fathers near Rome, and in 2012, he was chosen as the secretary of the General Abbey of the Order. In 2013, he was appointed as a postulator of the beatification cause of the 19 Martyrs of Algeria. He's the author of a text on the Martyrs of Algeria. Many of you know this text. For those of you who don't know it, you can find it in the bookshop. It is entitled La nostra morte non ci appartiene, Our Death Does Not Belong to Us. This is the history of the 19th Martyrs of Algeria, and it was co-written with the journalist Christophe Henning. First of all, I would like to ask to Professor Prades to talk about the contents of this document, to help us understand why the Theological Commission has believed it very important under very difficult circumstances of 15 years ago, when Dignitatis Humanae was published during the Second Vatican Council, to focus once again on religious freedom. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for inviting me here to share with you the life and understanding of the path of our societies and the Christian life. I'm really very glad to be here today. Now, I will make 4 statements. To tell you my stance and opinions on these documents, which I invite you to read, because it is very rich and it is much more comprehensive than what I will be saying today. So I will basically focus on 4 different points that can help us understand the main contents of the document. First, if someone of us was asked, what do you think religious freedom is? Most probably, each one of us could immediately think about the legal and political aspect. Right of speech, right against no discrimination, death, martyr. So, when religious freedom is discussed by the press, it is usually associated with the countries where religious freedom is pursued. And these are real issues and very serious issues. Let me take a step back. I believe that for us laymen who don't have any specific role, the first issue coming to our mind talking about religious freedom is to connect it to the understanding of the human being and of the human dimension. When talking about religious freedom, what is at stake is what is man? Who am I? As Leopardi used to say. The world is full of people who are ready to tell us what we are and who we are. And if we give up on that, if the overall answer is not enough, all the rest, all the remaining consequences are not enough. Consequences can be discussed, but in that case, only discussing about consequences is not enough because you cannot understand the roots. So this is why the anthropological issue is very important, and the anthropological issue, first and foremost, focuses on the idea that on the experience, on our experience of religious freedom. John Paul II said that religious freedom is like the cornerstone on which the whole building of human rights grows, because it provides a way to understand man. Many of you who are here today have probably read a book by Father Giussani, Il senso religioso, the religious meaning. And in one of his chapters, Father Giussani talks about the foundations of freedom. And in order to explain it, he draws a circle, which at the beginning is empty, and then there's a point. And Father Giussani said this point is the freedom of each one of us, surrounded by all sociological, social, biological, cultural factors, which could suffocate human freedom among all the different factors and circumstances. Then, in the next drawings, he draws an X outside the circle, saying that that X stands for the relation with mystery, and there's an arrow connecting the X and the point under the different living circumstances and the relation with mystery. If that X was not there, if the factor outside the circle was not there, actually, human freedom would be suffocated. And that's why we would all be at the mercy of those who have more power and can better manage the circumstances. Therefore, when talking about religious freedom, it is important to understand that religious freedom is the most important concept of freedom. If you remember, in chapter number 10, Father Giussani explains how questions are asked. There's the I, the me, getting in contact with the irreal, and is mesmerized. And when he talks about self-awareness, Father Giussani says the I who has woken up is dependent on something. If we look in ourselves, if we go deep down in ourselves, we realize that there's something which we should call you with a capital letter. It's like it's as if God was born out of the mystery. And that leads to the I depending on mystery. Hence, prayer as the real human attitude, which can explain dependence. When reading newspapers, when listening to people's opinions, the first thing to do is to catch the human dimension, which has its own dignity when dignity is acknowledged in full in relation with mystery. And this is something we always have to bear in mind, because there could be solutions whereby a certain government could respect some rights, worship, or it could authorize a procession. But they don't really explain fully the concept unless the relation with oneself is understood, oneself being open to mystery. So the first battle on religious freedom is fully living the human dimension. And this is our own responsibility. Then there's people having legal, journal, political responsibilities, and they have to play their own roles. But all of us, as human beings, must fully live and understand the human dimension. This can be understood by an open man, an open-minded man, open to mystery, and man living religious traditions. But even more so, the Christians should understand this concept, because we have realized that the human dimension has flourished, become aware with a historic meeting to achieve a community. I couldn't say who I am without the meeting I have done, because the meeting is what mostly counts. My face would not be there. It's not an optional. This has to do with intelligence, with the awareness, self-awareness. And none of us could really tell their own name without that meeting. People who live a faith as a lifestyle to the service of us all, to the service of Christians and laymen, the people who live a faith and those who realize that they couldn't live with a relation with mystery, show that human freedom conceived at different levels is decisive for our human contribution to the benefit of all. So this is the starting point of religious freedom. Second, this experience cannot be done in a workshop. No one can do that in theory. Maybe some philosopher could do that, but not even that. They need a mother to learn the language and to become philosophers. There's no engineer, there's no one without a mother. A relation is needed. To make dignity grow, and to have a relation with mystery. Now, second, the historical and community perspective for at all levels, and to express the religious dimension. Now, in this context, the change promoted by the Church and Western societies, civilizations, is very interesting. The change after the Second Vatican Council, because at that time, religion could seem to be at the end of a secularization process, which, after the Iron Curtain, would lead to something else. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the religion would disappear, and on this side of the Iron Curtain, secularization after 1968 would destroy religion sooner or later. But that was really not the case, due to different reasons, due to globalization, migration, people's movement, movements of history which cannot be governed by us, but which we can only understand and, if any, correct. Religion as a community phenomenon is alive and kicking today. The West world would have approved an intimate relation, an intimate religion, a personal religion. Today, religion can still remain in our society on condition that it remains something private. Therefore, these documents claims for the social dimension of man and its religious expression. Hence, the very important value of religion as a phenomenon of the community. There's no values, there's no social skills, there's no language, there is no evolved society, and there's no contribution to the good of everyone that is not based on relation, because the link is a prerequisite for all that. And this is very important in order to talk about religious freedom. It is important to show the strict link between the personal and human dimension and the community dimension and religious experience and human experience. You don't need a personal God, you don't need a personal religious freedom, but religions in the community must promote the full dimension of the person, which is always a criterion for analysis. The religion as a community phenomenon has not disappeared from the world or from the Western world, although it seemed that it had left. And one of the consequences is that willy or nilly, the religion is something public, and that reopens the issue of the public meaning of truth. So everyone has their own truth. I have my own truth, you have your own truth. The truth is something common, and opinions are everywhere. It is difficult to find in our secularized world the importance of truth. There's people thinking of living the truth, and sometimes are considered a risk by other citizens. This is one of the ways in which we need to analyze the truth. There's religious traditions that are still very significant today that do not give up the truth. The problem has not yet been solved, but we can no longer say that the truth is a private concept. And the public debate it only focuses on opinions. This is no longer the case. This is a personal anthropological opinion that I have on the document. And let's now talk about the state. I'll just make a few statements on that. The relations of the person and the community with the state are very important. And please refer to the document for that. The document has tried to show something which is harder to understand, because when religions is violently pursued in the atheist worlds of the past or today, there's persecution, violence, and death. And it is less easy to really grasp, understand the cultural challenge existing in our liberal democracies, where there is the false neutrality of the liberal state as called by the document. The issue is much more complex than that, but I don't have time to dwell upon it here. In any case, a lot of attention is paid to understand the neutrality of the state critically, when neutrality is considered as a separation from any statement, from any ethical or religious belief, and is defended only from a formal perspective. So only formal rules are defined because they can guarantee full equality and therefore the justice and the common good. The European history very well knows the long and difficult process that was needed to reach the rule of law. And it is clear that a formal concept of rules is not enough to ensure the good of people and communities. And we can see that in the debates on multiculturalism, where, for example, talking about equality before the law, all European constitutions put equality before the law at the forefront of all ideas. Maybe there's discrimination or differences which formally are not there and cannot be seen, but actually give more advantage to some people. That's a very complex issue, and now relates to language, ethical, and ethnic issues. Europe is full of conflicts. Canada and the United States are full of these type of problems. If we don't want to go back to ethical, religious, or cultural issues, this formal interpretation of the rule of law will increasingly be not sufficient. And the same applies to religion. Coexistence cannot be done just by forcing religion not to be taken into account in the debate on the construction of a society. Criticism is needed religious, non-religious criticism is needed. Debate must be launched, but it is impossible to think that Western democracies continue to live and continue to be able to manage migrants' arrival or all the different challenges ahead just by focusing on procedures. The document focuses a lot on these aspects. To conclude, let's go back to our task. Many problems I have mentioned can hardly be understood by us. But it's not that we can just criticize governments or parliaments or just talk about these problems. I believe that we bear a serious responsibility if we don't not want to be part of the problem, but rather be part of the solution, as in live in freedom in a religious way. The first way to defend religious freedom is living religious freedom. And how can we do so? By living the faith. Faith is the free action before God. It's the free space for others, as can be seen in the martyr. So the martyr is the representative of religious freedom, and the martyr can generate a free space for all. Giving your life as a final act for freedom to God, without excluding your killer, which is an extreme way to live our relation with God. As Father Giussani said, the martyr is, and then virginity, are the two most important expressions of freedom, because in both cases we live a faith as the relation with mystery. Many of us who have had a disease which has been lived in faith have shown that faith under those circumstances can generate a space of freedom for us all. Thank you.
So this summarized provocative intervention when Professor Prades says the martyrs create spaces of freedom for everyone should be a suggestion for Father Georgeon. But before, I would like to give an introduction by reading a document which is seen as one of the most exceptional testimonies of the life of the Church in recent years, and maybe since the beginning of history. Many of you might have read it. It has been quoted already during the meeting, and it is also quoted in this document. That is to say, the will of Father Christian de Gégé, prior of Monastery of Our Lady of the Class in Tiberin.
Se mi capitasse un giorno.
So, if one day I should be a victim of terrorism, which seems to involve all the foreigners living in Algeria, I would want for my community, my church, my family to remember that my life was a gift to the Lord and to this country. I would want for them to accept that the only owner of every life cannot be alien to this death. I would want for them to pray for me. How can I be seen as apt for this kind of offer? And I would want for them to associate this death to many other deaths, just as violent but anonymous. My life has no more value than any other, nor any less value. In any case, it has not the innocence of childhood. I have lived long enough to know that I am an accomplice in the evil which seems to prevail so terribly in the world, even in the evil which might blindly strike me down. When the time comes, I should like to have a moment of spiritual clarity which would allow me to beg forgiveness of God and of my fellow human beings, and at the same time forgive with all my heart the one who could strike me down. I could not desire such a death. It seems to me important to state this. I do not see, in fact, how I could rejoice if the people I love were indiscriminately accused of my murder. It would be too high a price to pay for what will perhaps be called the grace of martyrdom. To owe it to an Algerian, whoever he might be, especially if he says he is acting in fidelity to what he believes to be Islam. I am aware of the scorn which can be heaped on the Algerians indiscriminately. I am also aware of the caricatures of Islam which a certain Islamism fosters. It is too easy to soothe one's conscience by identifying this religious way with the fundamentalist ideology of its extremists. For me, Algeria and Islam are something different. It is a body and a soul. I have proclaimed this often enough, I think, in the light of what I have received from it. I also often find there that true strength of the gospel, which I learned on my mother's knee, my very first church, precisely in Algeria, and already inspired with respect for Muslim believers. Obviously, my death will appear to confirm those who hastily judged me naive or idealistic. Let him tell us now what he thinks of his ideals. But these persons should know that finally my most avid curiosity will be set free. This is what I shall be able to do, God willing, immerse my gaze in that of the Father, to contemplate with him his children of Islam, just as he sees them, all shining with the glory of Christ, the fruit of his passion, filled with the gift of the Spirit, whose secret joy will always be to establish communion and restore the likeness, playing with the differences. For this life lost, totally mine and totally theirs. I thank God who seems to have willed it entirely for the sake of that joy in everything and in spite of everything. In this thank you, which is said for everything in my life from now on, I certainly include you, friends of yesterday and today, and you, my friends of this place, along with my mother and father, my sisters and brothers, and their families. You are the hundredfold granted as was promised. And also you, my last-minute friend, who will not have known what you are doing. Yes, I want this thank you and this goodbye to be a God bless for you too. May we meet again as happy thieves in paradise, if it please God, the Father of us both. Amen. Inshallah. Christian.
Buonasera.
Good afternoon. With Father Xavier, we went up to the Mount Tabor, where the theological thought shines. We will go back to the valley with me, because I'm here, and I would like to thank for the invitation. But I was saying I'm here because I want to talk about the testimony of the 19 martyrs in Algeria, to support and encourage religious freedom. The testimony of the martyrs is a very important heritage. Martyrs are a source of admiration for believers and of respect for all those that commit themselves to freedom, dignity, and peace among peoples. Martyrdom does not necessarily imply death. Sometimes it is exclusion from social life. Sometimes it is a series of small deaths in our everyday lives. What we call white martyrdom, as was defined by Monsignor Clevery, who was killed on August the 1st, 1996, he said that white martyrdom is what we try to live day after day. That is to say, the gift of life in a gaze, in a presence, in a smile, in an attention, a service, a form of work. Everything that makes it possible for us to share, donate, and give the life we have. Here, availability and abandonment become martyrdom. And he concludes, what is most important is that we cannot keep our lives to ourselves. Last year, Pope Francis said that white martyrdom can be found, for instance, in democratic countries when religious freedom is constrained. To live free to believe in God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit can actually lead us to white martyrdom. So, These 19 martyrs in Algeria are brothers and sisters to us. They are the examples of our lives as disciples of today and tomorrow. They are ahead of us on the path of testimony that the church has to give in Algeria, that was soaked in the blood of martyrs from the very beginning, but just like that of the global church. These 19 martyrs were all passionate supporters of their church, which they served with zeal. They loved Algeria. They loved its people, with whom, over the years, they had created friendships, humble and simple. But God shone in their hearts, in their lives, and in their silence. They show a clear, free faith, the faith of those who, with prayer and with their presence, create a space for dialogue. So in this sense, they translate into practice the thought of Pope Francis, who has great attention of the martyrs of our times, the victims of persecutions and violence because of religious reasons, as well as for victims of ideologies that exclude God from the lives of people and communities. The real religion should give account of the existence of the other in order to create a common space, an environment of cooperation with everybody in the will to walk together, to pray together, to work together, to grow together, and to help each other in creating peace. So, well, the background in the history of Algeria in the 90s is the following. Since 1990, Algeria experienced a dramatic religious and political crisis. The Islamic armed group and the Islamic Front tried to create an Islamic state, and this is actually the beginning of what happened a few years later in Iraq and Syria. Algeria then experienced civil war. A lot of armed groups supported the jihad and killed people, men, women in Algeria, scholars, journalists, lawyers, teachers, all people that could in the future, or rather that could create a democratic future for the country. The civil population was the target, was the tool to create terrorism and punishment for those who supported the government. And then, unexpectedly, in the end, also the Catholic Church in Algeria became a target since 1994. These martyrs are a beautiful image of the church in Algeria, a very small church, a few thousand believers, a lot of Africans that study in Algerian universities. A church that lives in poverty, and in freedom in a way, because it has lost its social power and its splendor. So this is a church that lives for love and everyday service to people who actually do not share the same beliefs. So this is a church that has been purified, that has no longer ambitions, and it can then therefore be a bridge, a tool of dialogue with Islam. This small church lives a prophetic mission, that is to say, to create the environment, the space for a peaceful dialogue between Muslims and Christians in the certainty, as Father de Chargé said, in the certainty that we are all children of God, made by God, and that God's children will recognize each other in the end. This is a church. These are martyrs of being something different, of a life that was donated to Christ and gospel. Monsignor Claverie recounted his childhood in Algeria in a colonial bubble that closed the eyes in front of the other, in front of the Muslims, because they were afraid of them. They were part of the landscape, so to speak. They were part of their lives. But Claverie talks about our life. So the other is recognized only if it is integrated in one's culture, in one's way to look at civilization, development, and relationships. So, well, in the end, the other was recognized only to the extent to which it was similar. So it's not been easy to find and meet the other in Algeria. After the independence war and after the French settlers left in 1972, the church found itself empty. It had lost almost everything. The genius of Duval, Archbishop of Algeria, was that he turned this church into an Algerian church, a church that humbly chose to serve a people who don't share our faith. So it chose to serve the poorest, the youngest, the smallest. So, well, the will and the trust of those who were responsible for this church, like Archbishop Duval, gave way to a new fruitful phase based on the will to promote an Algerian church rather than an embassy church, so to speak, which would only celebrate Mass for those foreign Christians that lived in the country. So an Algerian church, well, it might sound a bit strange It is not easy to be church in Algeria, where 99% of the population are Muslim. Algerian church means, first of all, to identify one's destiny with that of Algeria. At the end of the independence war, there was a lot to do to rebuild this country. Education, healthcare, social works. These were the fields where Christians could cooperate with the Muslim Algerians. These 19 martyrs were killed between 1994 and 1996. They belonged to 8 different religious congregations, and they knew each other well because there was this feeling of belonging that had developed through the years that was deeply rooted in them. This sense of belonging to the Church of Algeria, the Algerian Church. They all had some kind of apostolic influence, some in the social sector, some in the field of education. The monks, for instance, lived their lives in their monastery in prayer. But there is something that is important. That is to say, they had a convergence in terms of life and testimony. And this actually says a lot about the plan of God for these women and these men and this church. So this was the plan of God for them, but also for the Algerian people who hosted them, where these religious people gave the communion to make the love of God visible, especially the love of God for the poorest. So as I was saying, all wanted to live a mission that can be called a prophetic mission to promote a peaceful and friendly dialogue between Muslims and Christians, knowing that they were loved by the Lord. These 19 martyrs show that living together is not a utopia. Difference and prejudice are not unavoidable. Religions can work together to serve the common good, and they can contribute to the development of each single person and the creation of society. This commitment on the part of these martyrs, this involvement, as just one source, the cross of God, of Christ. Jesus on the cross keeps his arms open to put together the children of God and to free them from sin that divides and puts people one against the other and against God himself. In a country that has been crucified by the war, Jesus' cross made it possible to turn death into a fruitful gift where life is renewed and intensified. Archbishop Claverie talked about this gift in the light of the cross. He said he was asked the same question so many times. Why do you stay in this country that is upturned by violence, where there is no hope apparently? We are here because of the crucified Messiah. We do not have any other interest in saving. We have no influence. We are not led by any kind of perversion or masochism. We have no power, but we're here. Just like we would stay at the side of a very ill brother or a friend, silent, holding their hands, because it is Jesus who suffers in this violence that does not spare anyone, crucified once again in the flesh of thousands of innocent people, to offer one's life is not something that is reserved for martyrs only. Or we can become martyrs and witnesses of the free gift of love, of the free gift of one's life. This gift comes from the grace of God that was donated through Jesus Christ. So for them, the choice to stay in Algeria, in spite of all the pressure by the governments and also by the Holy See, this choice, which is the outcome of very Syrian reflections, well, this choice leads to something that is evident: the lack of our presence. Sister Odette wrote to one of the martyrs. So, well, the lack of our presence as Christians in Algeria is that we are taken back to the essential part of our faith, and so that we can live our faith taking account all its needs. We are asked to be men and women of hope. Algerians are tempted to give up, are tempted by desperation, so they need to meet people that live in hope. Hoping means that the living God is beside us, is inside us, and asks for our commitment in order to act. The life and death of Jesus remind us all the time that life and love always have the last say. So these lines by Sister Odette could have been written by any of these 19 martyrs and blessed. All would have stressed the importance of their friendship with these people in Algeria. All would have stressed this dialogue that they had gradually created with the others, those who were different from them.
Cosa ci dicono questi martiri? Ci dicono che
So what do these martyrs say? They say it is very difficult to meet the other because we have to abandon our comfort zones so we can see these in our personal relationships. We can be completely blind in front of those who are not similar to us but are near to us, because we are often afraid, because the other is too different from us. And often, in this blindness or ignorance of the other will have the upper hand and will be recognized in their difference. So this is what often makes those we do not look upon because they are different very aggressive. But the others are necessary. The others are what we need. We are alive and we believe because we have solidarity. This is what our faith tells us, what we can learn in our everyday life. We cannot exist in ourselves. The other, in its difference, is our condition to keep living, because as soon as we close up in ourselves and with those who are similar to us, death arrives. So it is the other, in their being different, that make us come out of ourselves and make us alive. To look only for those who are similar to us, to close ourselves up, this means to condemn ourselves to death. This could be the risk run by minorities everywhere. But this is actually the drama of minorities. The church in Algeria, even though it has always been a minority, was never closed up. It's always been part of a logic of openness and dialogue, because the great challenge of faith is that we live only if we go outside ourselves. And in our quest for the other, we can actually access a more profound and a freer life. The 19 martyrs, just like so many others, priests or religious people who lived through this so-called black years, live the same kind of experience, and they still do. The Algerian church wants to open up a space of dialogue and of reunion, so that they can be enriched by the difference of the other, of their faith. They do not want to convert them, but this difference tells us something about my own faith, about the way I am a testimony of my faith. And I think this was one of the gifts that they gave us during the blessing, the beatification ceremony that took place last December. And this was one of the gifts they gave us, because it was not, to be taken for granted that we could do that ceremony in Algeria. During a meeting with Pope Francis 2 years ago, the Pope told us that he would have liked for this ceremony to take place in Algeria, not because he wanted to open up past wounds. On the contrary, because the church wanted to help the Algerian people to heal their wounds.
La beatificazione in Algeria, quindi un fatto
So this unprecedented event in the history of church, the fact that the ceremony of beatification took place in Algeria, can be a light in our present and in our future, because it tells us that hatred is never the answer. It cannot be the answer to hatred. There is much more than a spiral of violence. So to do a step towards forgiveness and peace among people, starting from Algeria, but also going beyond the Algerian borders, this is a prophetic message for our world, for all of those who believe and work together for the common good. So the most difficult thing at the moment is to let the grace of the beatification of these martyrs become part of our everyday life. And I conclude with two words. You know what is about to happen in Algeria since 6 months. Every Friday, millions of people march through the streets to ask for a dramatic change, to ask for a real freedom. Maybe, without knowing, by celebrating the beatification of these martyrs in Algeria, we created something new. Algeria didn't have a face. It was a country which was often undervalued, underestimated, because of these black years of terrorism. Well, Algeria now has acquired a name. It has acquired freedom. And I like to think that one of the outcome, maybe the first miracle by the 19 martyrs, but by all the dead, because we talk about 150,000 people who were killed during these 10 years. Well, this is maybe the first fruit of the beatification of these martyrs, is this peaceful revolt of the people that Algeria is experiencing in recent months. And I believe that this should be a reason of joy for our martyr brothers and sisters who offered their lives to be testimony of hope. And today, hope has a face in Algeria.
Abbiamo ancora 5
We still have 5 minutes left. I will ask a very short answer to our two speakers. And my question is the following, Father Georgeon. Our life is led in a totally different context. totally different from Algeria. And I was struck by the coexistence between realism. It is not simple to meet others if you really want to meet them. Old patterns are not enough. Old nostalgia is not enough. It is not enough to hide in a fortress. You need to stay there. This is quite impressive, and this can clearly be seen in the book. Nobody went away, although they could go away. They stayed not because of a strategy, but because through others, people needed to understand the essential. Can you explain this concept to us? Why did people feel that they had to remain and to meet others? I think that today's danger, not only versus Islam, but in its wider meaning, is our ignorance on others. If we don't make a mutual effort to understand one another, then we cannot know what the future holds in store for us. As Christians, we are called upon to live in a community, behave as if we were in a community, and learn to set up a community with people who are different from us. Getting closer to other people would allow us to have a better knowledge, because ignorance leads first and foremost to indifference, and then it takes us a bit further. It leads to violence. And in the end, it leads to hatred and desire to kill others just because they don't think the same way. So it is easier to kill them or take them away from our sight rather than meeting them. So knowledge is needed. Mutual knowledge is needed among different religions. I was struck by the events of the past few months. On the 8th of December, there was the beatification ceremony, which was a historic event for the Church. After that, there was Pope Francis' journey to Abu Dhabi and the signature of the document on human fraternity with Imam Al-Azhar. And then there was Pope Francis' journey to Morocco to visit the king, who's the commander of believers in Islam. So the Church set off to meet others in its own difference. And the Church has always behaved as a guest, because it was the Church that went to see others. There is also journeys the other way around, clearly. So we can see the desire to understand one another, to meet one another, to get to know one another, in order to provide the world an open future, a future which is open to religious freedom and freedom, to believe and freedom of conscience. So I hope all these steps can bear their fruits in a future which is not too far away from us. Thank you. Professor Prades, why did you talk about a very serious responsibility, personal responsibility on all of us? You didn't talk about living religious freedoms, but you talked about living freedom in a religious way. So, living faith. Can you say something more about this? So we were talking about the right to religious freedoms, and the right is the legal protection of something, of an asset. During these meetings, I think it is important for us to really realize what this good is for us. It is effective when this good comes out from experience. And if a good comes out from an experience, it is widely understood because we can see some features that can only be seen when you live an experience. For example, surprise before full freedom. Listening to Father de Chergé, a question came to me. Why? Why is he so free? When you realize that those 19 martyrs could go back to Spain or France, why didn't they go back? Where did their freedom not to go back come from? When you start realizing your freedom, maybe a freedom which you don't yet have fully, the first way to experience freedom fully is that freedom can be recognized when it is in front of you. So I hope that after these meetings, we can be more aware and more capable of recognizing freedom. Thank you. Thank you very much to our two speakers, Professor Prades and Father Georgeon. I don't want to add anything else to that. For those of you who arrived yesterday and today, and repetita iuvant, so once again I would say that it is part of our freedom and religious freedom, the fact that we have to be responsible for what is happening here. So we need to be responsible in practice. So let's support the meeting with our donations. It doesn't matter how much you donate, but it is a gesture of responsibility to build this unique place so that it can continue living. Thank you very much. I kindly ask you to get out as soon as possible because we're 10 minutes late. Thank you very much and goodbye.